A little girl once said 7 words that stopped a grown man cold. 7 words that cracked open something in him he'd spent 3 years sealing shut. 7 words that changed, not just his life, but the life of a woman who had everything money could buy, and still cried herself to sleep in a house with 12 rooms and no one in any of them who truly knew her. The girl was 5 years old. She didn't know what she was doing. She just knew what she felt. And sometimes, the purest truth in the room belongs to the smallest person in it. This is the story of Leland Okafor, a single dad, a man who smelled like sawdust and Sunday mornings and unconditional love, and Claudette Farrow, a CEO who had built an empire but could not build a home. And the little girl between them? Her name was Rosie. And Rosie saw everything the adults were too afraid to admit. Stay with me. This one is going to take you somewhere. Leland Okafor grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Raleigh, North Carolina, the kind of house where the heating worked 3 out of 4 seasons, and you learned to be grateful anyway. His father was a carpenter, not a contractor, a carpenter, the kind who still measured twice, cut once, and took pride in the calluses on his hands like they were medals. His mother worked the front desk of a medical clinic Monday through Friday, and sang in the church choir on Sundays with a voice that made strangers cry in the third pew. They weren't wealthy, but they were present, and Leland grew up understanding something that took most men decades to learn, but if they learned it at all, that showing up is the most important thing a person can do for the people they love. He carried that lesson like a compass. When he was 24, he met a woman named Priscilla at a mutual friend's barbecue. She was laughing at something. He never even heard the joke. But the laugh pulled him across the yard before he knew his feet were moving. They dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony in her aunt's backyard in Charlotte, North Carolina. 30 guests, a rented tent, and a wedding cake that leaned slightly to the left because the baker was a friend doing them a favor. It was imperfect. It was perfect. And 1 year later, a little girl came into the world at 3:17 in the morning, in the Vant, and with a set of lungs that the delivery nurse called, and this is a direct quote, absolutely unreasonable for someone that small. They named her Rosie, after Priscilla's grandmother, after the flower, after something soft and living and worth protecting. Leland held that baby in the delivery room, and something in his chest reorganized itself, like furniture being moved in a room to make space for something that would now live there permanently. He was a father. And for 2 years, life was not easy. They were still getting by on Leland's income from his contracting business and Priscilla's part-time work at a dental office. But it was good. The kind of good that's made of small moments, Rosie's first steps, the way she called him Dee before she could say Daddy, Saturday morning cartoons with cereal and a blanket on the couch. Then Priscilla got sick. They called it an aggressive form of leukemia. Aggressive is the word the doctors used, like the disease had somewhere to be and couldn't wait. Leland remembers sitting in that first oncologist's office and the room going very quiet inside his head, like someone had turned the volume down on everything except his own heartbeat. Priscilla reached over and took his hand. She was the one who'd just been given the diagnosis, and she was the one doing the comforting. That was who she was. They fought it for 14 months. Treatments, hospital stays, good days, and terrible days. Leland ran his contracting jobs during the day and sat by her bed in the evenings. His mother drove up from Raleigh to help with Rosie on the weeks that were hard. His dad built a ramp on the front porch for when Priscilla came home between treatments, even though she told him she didn't need it. She used it every single time. Priscilla passed on a Thursday morning in October. Rosie was 2 years and 4 months old. The grief that follows losing a spouse is not linear. People tell you it comes in waves. That's true. What they don't always tell you is that sometimes the waves don't announce themselves. Sometimes you're standing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store and you see the brand she used to buy, and you have to put your hand on the shelf just to stay upright. But here's the thing about Leland Okafor that you need to understand before the story goes any further. He grieved, deeply, privately, completely. And then, because he had a little girl at home who had her mother's eyes and deserved a whole life, He got back up. He didn't date. He didn't numb himself. He didn't disappear into work or into a bottle or into the comfortable lie that staying busy is the same as healing. He healed. Slowly. Intentionally. With the help of a grief counselor named Dr. Bernard, who wore the same cardigan every session and never once made Leland feel like his emotions were too large for the room. By the time Rosie turned 4, Leland had rebuilt a version of himself that he was genuinely proud of. Not the old version. Grief changes you, there's no going back to before. But a new version. Steady, present, open. He was 31 years old. He was raising a daughter alone. He was running a small but respected residential contracting business. He coached Rosie's Saturday morning soccer class at the rec center, even though, by his own admission, the only sport he truly understood was watching football on Sundays. He was okay. And then Claudette Farrow called his company about a renovation. Claudette Farrow was not a woman who needed saving. Let's be clear about that from the beginning, because this story is not about a woman waiting to be rescued. It's about a woman who had built such a competent, controlled, successful exterior that she had almost forgotten there was a softer interior underneath. And what happens when life cracks the exterior open just enough to let something real back in? She was 34 years old, CEO of Farrow Capital Group, a mid-sized private equity firm based in Charlotte that managed just under $2 billion in assets and had a reputation in the financial world for being sharp, selective, and unapologetically results-driven. That reputation, in large part, was because of Claudette. She had taken over the company from her father 5 years earlier, after he had a heart attack, and announced from his hospital bed, with the confidence of a man who had never in his life asked permission, that he was retiring, and she was up. She'd been COO for 2 years at that point. She knew the company, she knew the clients, she knew what needed to change. She changed it. Revenues were up 40% in 3 years. She recruited 3 senior partners who brought books of business that tripled the firm's footprint. She opened a satellite office in Atlanta. She was featured in a regional business magazine under the headline, The Quiet Force. She hated the headline, specifically the word quiet, but the photographer had been professional, so she sent a handwritten thank you note anyway, because her mother raised her right. On paper, Claudette Farrow was a triumph. In the kitchen of her 4,000-square-foot home in the Eastover neighborhood of Charlotte at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, she was eating leftover Thai food out of the container because she hadn't been to the grocery store in 11 days. Her daughter Pippa was 5. Full name, Philippa Renee Farrow. Called Pippa since approximately 4 days after her birth, when Claudette's mother held the baby and said, "She looks like a Pippa." And somehow that was that. Pippa was, by every account, a genuinely enchanting child. Not in the precocious performative way that makes adults want to check their watches. In the real way, the way where she noticed things, the way where she'd stop in the middle of a sidewalk to watch a caterpillar cross a crack in the concrete and say, "I think he knows where he's going, Mommy." The way where she remembered the name of every single person she'd ever met and asked about them by name the next time they came up. Her daycare teachers adored her. Her pediatrician said she was one of the most emotionally intelligent 5-year-olds she'd seen in 20 years of practice. Her father, Claudette's ex-husband, a man named Roland Fitch, saw her every other weekend when his schedule permitted, which was not as often as it should have been. Roland was not a villain. Not that he was simply a man who had married the idea of Claudette more than the reality of her. And when the reality turned out to be someone who worked 12-hour days and built companies and had opinions about everything, he decided he preferred something easier. The divorce was 18 months ago. Clean. No drama. The lawyers handled it efficiently. Claudette had cried exactly twice. Once the night Roland moved out, and once about 3 weeks later when she was at a work dinner and someone asked her, "How's the family?" And she opened her mouth and then didn't know what to say. After that, she didn't cry about it again. She did, however, notice the silence in the house. The house was gorgeous. She had decorated it beautifully. She had excellent taste and the budget to execute it. But gorgeous, it turned out, could coexist with lonely. Neither the rooms were styled. They were not inhabited. There was no mess, no proof of daily living, no second coffee mug on the counter. Pippa was the only real, breathing, living warmth in the house, and Claudette sometimes worried, in the 2 a.m. hours when she couldn't sleep, that she was not giving her daughter enough of what she needed. She was present. She was a good mother. She made Pippa breakfast every morning and read to her every night without exception, even the nights when she got home at 9 and was exhausted to her bones. But she knew, in the way that self-aware people know things they haven't said out loud yet, that something was missing. Not just for Pippa, for herself. The renovation project started because of the kitchen. Specifically, because the kitchen in the Eastover house was large and expensive and 12 years old, and Claudette had decided, as she made decisions, that it was time to update it. She wanted better workflow. She wanted a different layout. She wanted to actually want to cook in there, rather than opening the refrigerator, seeing its sparse contents, and closing it again. Her assistant, Gina, found 3 contractors and set up site visits. The first 2 were fine. Professional. They talked to her the way people sometimes talk to women who were clearly successful, with the faint undertone of surprise, as if they'd expected someone else and were recalibrating in real time. The third contractor arrived on a Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock. His name was Leland Okafor. He pulled up in a clean but clearly well-used pickup truck, work boots, on dark green work shirt with Okafor contracting embroidered on the chest. He was tall, not dramatically so, but the kind of tall that fills a doorway in a way that makes you step back slightly. He had the hands of someone who actually did the work, not just supervised it. And he had, Claudette noticed this in spite of herself, a quality of stillness about him that was unusual. He wasn't performing confidence. He just had it. He looked around her kitchen with a trained eye, asked smart questions, took measurements, and listened, actually listened, when she explained what she wanted and why. He did not tell her what she should want. He did not redirect her preferences toward something more standard or cost-effective without her asking. He simply said at the end of the walkthrough, "I can do this. I think I can actually make it better than what you've described. Can I send you a revised sketch before the formal proposal?" She said yes. The sketch arrived the next morning, and it was better, subtly, intelligently. He'd rerouted the layout just slightly to give her the island she wanted while also improving the traffic flow toward the back door. And he'd noted in the margin, in actual handwriting, not typed, "If you ever cook with your daughter, this gives her a spot where she can sit and be part of it without being underfoot." Optional, but I thought it was worth showing. Claudette stared at that note for a long time. She hired him. The kitchen renovation was scheduled to take 6 weeks. Leland and his 2-person crew, a young guy named Ferris who was 23 and enthusiastically terrible at small talk, and a skilled older tradesman named August, who had been in the business 30 years and spoke only when he had something genuinely useful to say, started demo the first Monday of the project. Claudette, for the most part, was not home during the day. She was at the office, or in meetings, or on calls. She left early and came home late. Gina managed the logistics, payments, scheduling, access, and Leland coordinated everything through her. They were professional, efficient, communicative. And then, Pippa met Leland. It was a Thursday. Claudette had a late morning, a board call that wasn't until 10, which meant she was still in the kitchen making Pippa's breakfast when Leland arrived slightly earlier than usual because he needed to catch the tile delivery before 8. He knocked. Claudette, still in her pajama top and work blazer, the specific combo of someone who works from home sometimes and has given up the pretense of the full outfit before 9, opened the door. There was a brief mutual moment of, "Oh." "I'm sorry," Leland said immediately. "I'm 20 minutes early. I can wait in the truck." "No, come in," Claudette said, stepping back. "I'm sorry about the—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "You look fine," he said. Simple, not flirtatious, just accurate, which somehow made it worse. He came in and was making his way to the work area when Pippa appeared in the hallway. She was wearing yellow pajamas with small dinosaurs on them, Her hair, dark and curly like her mother's, was doing approximately 4 different things at once. She was holding a stuffed rabbit named, per her own declaration, Mr. Hops II, in it because the original Mr. Hops had been left in a hotel in Asheville and grief was complicated. She looked at Leland. Leland looked at her. "Hi," said Pippa. "Hi," said Leland. "You're very tall," she said. "So I've been told," he said. She considered this. Then, "Do you work here now?" "For a few weeks," he said. "I'm fixing the kitchen." "It's broken?" "It's outdated." Pippa nodded slowly, as if outdated was a concept she was actively filing away. Then she looked at her mother and said, "He smells like Daddy's tools." Claudette froze very slightly. Not Roland. Pippa hardly mentioned Roland, her grandfather, Claudette's father, a man named Rupert Farrow who had a workshop in his garage and smelled perpetually of cedar and machine oil. Rupert had passed away 9 months ago, pancreatic cancer, swift and brutal, and Pippa, who had adored him with the uncomplicated devotion that small children reserve for grandparents who give them their full attention, had not entirely processed it. Claudette said quietly, "Go finish your breakfast, baby." Pippa went. But she looked back at Leland one more time before she rounded the corner. After that, Pippa found reasons to be in the kitchen area. Claudette was partly amused, partly watchful. She knew her daughter. Pippa attached to things that felt safe, and something about this man had registered in whatever internal barometer Pippa used to assess the world. Leland was patient with her in the way that people are patient with children when it isn't performed, when it's just natural. He answered her questions. He showed her things. When she asked why he was taking off the cabinets, he explained it simply and correctly. When she asked if he was scared when he used the loud tools, he said, "A little, at first. But then you learn to respect them, and they don't scare you anymore." Pippa had thought about this very seriously and said, "Like swimming." "Exactly like swimming," Leland said. Claudette, who had been pretending to answer emails at the kitchen table while actually listening to every word of this exchange, looked up and found Leland looking at her over Pippa's head with an expression that was, she wasn't sure. Warm, a little wry, like they'd just shared something without words. She looked back at her laptop. Her heart was doing something she hadn't authorized. The 6 weeks passed. Not without friction. There were 2 material delays that pushed the timeline, and 1 subcontractor who was supposed to install the countertops and didn't show up, which required Leland to spend a Saturday making calls and solving problems that were not technically his to solve, but which he solved anyway because that was apparently just how he operated. Claudette noticed things about him over those weeks. The way he cleaned up the worksite every single evening, even when they'd clearly be tearing it up again the next morning. The way he communicated problems before they became crises. The way, on the one occasion she came home to find something had gone wrong with the plumbing, a fitting failure, not his fault, catastrophically bad timing. He was still there at 6:30 p.m., on the phone with an emergency plumber, having already moved her dining room furniture to protect it, and when she walked in looking panicked, he said simply, "I have it handled. I'm sorry this happened. And you won't be sleeping on your feet tonight." She hadn't been worried about sleeping. She'd been worried about him, whether he'd just walk away from the mess. He didn't. Of course he didn't. The kitchen was finished on a Friday. It was magnificent. Clean lines, warm materials, the island exactly right, the lighting exactly right, and yes, a small stool at the perfect height, positioned so that a 5-year-old could sit and watch and participate and be part of the kitchen without being in the way. Claudette walked through it alone the first night, after Pippa was asleep. She ran her hand along the countertop. She thought about the handwritten note in the margin of the sketch. She thought about how long it had been since someone had thought about her life in a way that was thoughtful, not transactional, not performative, just genuinely, but quietly considerate. She made herself a cup of tea in the new kitchen. She sat at the island. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't want to be somewhere else. The final payment was processed. The project was closed. Leland packed up the last of his equipment, said goodbye to Gina over the phone, and that was, professionally speaking, that. Except 3 days later, Claudette emailed him. It was a professional email, formal even. She'd noticed a small issue with one of the cabinet hinges. It wasn't closing all the way flush. Could someone come take a look? Leland came himself. It took 7 minutes to fix. They stood in the kitchen for 23 more minutes talking about the house, about the neighborhood, about a restaurant nearby that Leland mentioned he'd taken his daughter to once. And Claudette said she'd never tried it, and he said it was worth the trip, and she said maybe, and that was that. He left. She thought about it for 2 days. The second time they talked was at the hardware store, of all places. Claudette was there because one of the bathroom faucets had started dripping, and she decided, for reasons she would later identify as demonstrating independence and/or avoiding the temptation to call him professionally, to try to fix it herself. She was standing in front of an aisle of faucet parts, looking genuinely baffled, when a familiar voice said from 2 feet away, "Cartridge or O-ring?" She turned around. Leland was standing there holding a box of something, looking at her with the composed amusement he seemed to carry at about 30% capacity at all times. "I have no idea," she said. "What's the faucet doing?" "Dripping." "Where?" "The spout." "Cartridge," he said. "Probably." He looked at the packaging she was holding. "Not that one, though." "What's the brand of your faucet?" she told him. He led her 3 feet to the left and picked up the correct part without hesitation. "Thank you," she said. "I could just fix it for you," he said, then, clearly aware of how that sounded, "professionally. As a job. I'm not. I know what you meant," she said, and she was smiling, which he saw, and that made him smile too. And then they were both just standing there in the plumbing aisle, smiling at the cartridge packaging like it was interesting, which it very much was not. "Actually," she said, "I think I should try to do it myself. Pippa's been asking how things work lately. I thought it might be good for her to see her mom fix something." Something crossed his face then, something that wasn't just pleasant or polite, something that recognized the intention behind what she'd said. "That's a good instinct," he said. "Will it be hard?" she asked. "Moderate. YouTube the model number first. If it goes wrong, call someone." "Should I call you?" she said. A beat. "Yeah," he said. "You should call me." She fixed the faucet herself. She FaceTimed Leland when she got stuck on the 3rd step. He talked her through it. Pippa sat on the bathroom floor and handed her the tools and said, "We're doing a great job, Mommy," with such total confidence that Claudette had to stop for a second because she felt something in her chest that was warm and complicated and good. When the drip stopped, Pippa said, "Can we call Mr. Leland and tell him?" Claudette looked at the phone in her hand. She was already on the call. "I heard," Leland said. "Nice work." "We did it," Pippa shouted at the phone. "I heard that too," Leland said, and he was laughing. It happened because of a Saturday. Claudette had a meeting, unexpected, unavoidable, the kind that only happens on weekends to people whose professional lives have no clean edges. She needed someone to watch Pippa for 3 hours. Her usual sitter was out of town. Her mother was in Greensboro. Roland's weekend wasn't until next week. She was going down a list in her head, getting increasingly tense, when her phone rang. It was Leland. About an unrelated piece of advice she'd asked him for, about a deck she was thinking of adding to the back of the house. She answered, They talked about the deck for approximately 90 seconds, and then she said, not really meaning to, "Sorry, I'm slightly distracted. I'm trying to figure out who can watch Pippa for a few hours Saturday morning." A pause. "I'll be with my daughter Saturday morning," Leland said. "Rosie's soccer class got canceled. We were going to go to the park. You could bring Pippa." Claudette thought about saying no. She thought about how it would look, what it would mean, whether it was appropriate, whether it was a line she was crossing. Then she thought about Pippa, who would love the park, and Leland, who was, whatever else was complicated about this situation, someone she trusted. "Are you sure?" she said. "Positive," he said. Rosie Okafor and Pippa Farrow met at the park on a Saturday morning in April and were, within approximately 4 minutes, inseparable. This was remarkable because Rosie was 3 years older. She was 8 now, and children of 8 do not typically grant immediate entry to children of 5. There is usually an audition period, a probation, not with Rosie. Rosie was her father's daughter in every important way. She had the same quality of stillness, the same watchful warmth, the same instinct for meeting people where they were. She looked at Pippa seriously when Pippa told her that her stuffed rabbit's name was Mr. Hops II, asked one clarifying question, "What happened to the first one?" and then said very gravely, "I think that's a very strong name." And that was that. They were friends. Leland and Claudette sat on a bench while the girls played. They talked for 3 hours, not about work, not about the deck, not about logistics, about Priscilla, about grief, about what it's like to raise a child alone, not because you chose it, but because life reorganized itself without asking. About the specific way loneliness has in a house with a child in it, because you're never alone, technically. And yet the particular loneliness of being the only adult in the room never quite goes away. Claudette talked about Roland, about the marriage, about the part that wasn't his fault, that they had been two people who wanted very different versions of their lives and had miscommunicated that clearly for years. "Do you regret it?" Leland asked, not prying, genuinely asking. She thought about it. "I regret that I wasn't braver earlier," she said. "I regret waiting until it was painful for both of us to admit it wasn't working. But no, I don't regret the divorce." "Do you regret the marriage?" A longer pause. "I got Pippa," she said. He nodded, like he understood exactly what that sentence contained. Or, "I got Rosie," he said. They sat with that for a moment. Across the park, Rosie was teaching Pippa how to do a cartwheel. Pippa's cartwheel was, generously, more of a collapse than a rotation, but she got up every time laughing. "She's remarkable," Claudette said, watching Rosie. "She saved my life," Leland said simply. "After Priscilla, I won't dress it up. She gave me a reason to get back up, every morning. She was my reason." Claudette looked at him. "You're a good father," she said. He looked back at her. "You're a good mother," he said. And there it was. The thing that neither of them had said out loud to anyone who wasn't obligated by relationship to say it. The thing they were each secretly afraid was not entirely true about themselves, said by someone who had no reason to lie, no stake in the flattery, just the truth. Just, here it is. Claudette looked back at the girls. She cleared her throat. "So," she said, "the deck. Tell me more about what you'd recommend for the railing situation." He laughed, not at her, with her, at the pivot and at the recognition of what the pivot was covering, and at the shared understanding that they both knew exactly what was happening and were both, for now, going to let it happen quietly. "Sure," he said. "Railing." A month passed. During that month, 3 more park visits, 2 phone calls that started about the deck and ended 2 hours later, having covered parenting, childhood memories. Pete, the particular challenge of being a black professional woman in financial services, the particular challenge of running a small business in an industry dominated by larger players, a heated but good-natured argument about whether pineapple on pizza represented a legitimate culinary choice or a fundamental breakdown in food ethics. Leland against, Claudette stubbornly in favor, Rosie consulted via text, "I think everyone should just be happy." And one shared playlist that Claudette made and sent him on a Tuesday night because a song had come on while she was working late, and she thought, for no professional reason whatsoever, that he would like it. He texted back 4 minutes later. "Already heard this one. Good taste." She put her phone face down on the desk and sat there smiling at the ceiling for a moment before she caught herself and went back to the quarterly report. Something was happening, something that she was very carefully not naming, because naming it would make it real, and real things could be damaged, and she had spent the last 18 months putting the undamaged parts of herself back together, and she did not particularly want to risk them. The problem was that the thing kept happening anyway, unnamed. Her friend Delia Vance, who had known Claudette since college, who had been maid of honor at her wedding and brought her 2 bottles of expensive wine the week after the divorce, and said, "Let's not talk about it until you want to, and when you want to, I'm here," noticed. "You're different," Delia said over lunch on a Thursday. "Bahra, I'm the same," Claudette said. "You smiled at the waiter," Delia said. "I always smile at waiters." "Not like that. That was a real smile, the full one. The one you do when something is actually good." Delia tilted her head. "What's happening?" "Nothing's happening." "Claudette," a pause. There's a man," Claudette said. Delia put down her fork. "Tell me everything." So Claudette told her. The contractor, the kitchen, the park, the phone calls, the Tuesday night playlist. When she finished, Delia said, "So what's the problem?" Claudette stopped. "It's complicated." "Why?" "He's a contractor. I'm a CEO. There's a power dynamic issue." "You hired him once. You're not his boss. Next." "He's a widower. He has a daughter. There's a lot of..." "He's not a project," Delia said. "He's a person. That's not complicated. That's just real life." Next. Claudette looked at her salad. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said, quieter. Delia's expression shifted, softer. "Babe," she said, "nobody's ever ready. Ready is a story we tell ourselves to explain why we waited so long." Claudette didn't say anything. "He sounds like a good man," Delia said. "He is," Claudette said without any hesitation, which surprised even her. "Then stop managing it," Delia said, "and just be in it." Claudette went home and did the exact opposite. She pulled back. Professionally, efficiently, with perfect courtesy. She canceled a planned park morning with a work excuse that was technically true, and she went 3 weeks without calling him, and when he texted once, just, "How's the deck planning going?" she replied, "Still deciding, I'll be in touch." Clean, firm, safe. She told herself this was wise. She told herself this was protecting both of them. She told herself a lot of things in those 3 weeks. She also did not sleep particularly well. It was a Friday evening. Claudette had a company event, an annual dinner for senior staff and clients, held at a private room in one of the upscale restaurants downtown. It was important, visible. The kind of event where she was on the whole night, working the room, being the version of herself that the professional world required. She had arranged for Pippa to stay with Delia for the evening. At 5:30, as Claudette was getting ready, dress on, earrings in, the careful, competent ritual of presenting herself, her doorbell rang. She answered it. It was Leland. Standing on her front step, not in work clothes, but in actual clothes, dark pants, on a simple, well-fitted shirt, holding Rosie's hand. Rosie was in a soccer uniform, clearly just off a game. Rosie wanted to show Pippa her medal, he said. He held up a plastic gold medal on a ribbon. "I know it's last minute. Is Pippa?" "She's here," Claudette said, stepping back. "Come in. I'm heading out soon, but we won't stay long," he said. He stopped. He looked at her. She was in a fitted midnight blue dress, hair done, heels, the full professional armor. "You look..." he started. Then he stopped himself, started again. "You look great." "Thank you," she said. Formal, too formal. She heard it. Pippa appeared from around the corner, and the moment Rosie saw her, the two of them were immediately in motion. Rosie thrusting the medal out and launching into a play-by-play of the goal she'd scored. Pippa listening with huge eyes and the expression of someone receiving very important news. Claudette and Leland stood in the entryway. There was a distance between them, not physical, but the distance she'd manufactured over 3 weeks of careful strategic retreat. "I've been a little quiet lately," she said. "I noticed," he said. She looked for the word. "Processing." "Okay," he said. "No pressure, no agenda." She looked at him, at this man who had shown up to her house, to every problem, to every moment, without a single ounce of performance, who had never once asked her for more than she was giving, who had simply been present. The thing she'd been not naming pushed up against the walls she'd built around it. She opened her mouth, and then Pippa tugged on the hem of Leland's shirt. Both adults looked down. Pippa had wrapped both arms around Leland's waist from the side and was looking up at him with Rosie's medal in her hand, which apparently had been granted to her temporarily for admiration purposes. "Mr. Leland," Pippa said, "please don't go." He looked down at her, surprised. "I wasn't going anywhere yet, sweetheart." "Good," she said, and tightened her hold. And then, with the total honesty of someone who says what they feel because they don't yet know they shouldn't, she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, pressing her face into his side, "You smell like my real dad." The room went completely still. Claudette's hand went to her mouth. Leland was very still, too. Not stiff. Still in the way that people are still when something is reached all the way in and touched the part of them they keep protected. But he looked down at Pippa for a long moment. Then, very gently, he put one hand on her back. "Thank you," he said, quietly. "That's one of the kindest things anybody's ever said to me." Pippa released him and ran back to Rosie to return the medal. Claudette and Leland looked at each other. Claudette's eyes were bright. Her throat was tight. She pressed her lips together. "She means her grandfather," she said, voice steady, mostly. "My father. He passed away last year. He had a workshop. He smelled like—" She stopped. "I know," Leland said. A pause. "Claudette," he said, her name in his voice, unhurried, unadorned. "Don't," she said, not harshly, just a warning, from someone standing at the edge of something. "I'm not going to push anything," he said. I want to say one thing. And then I'll take Rosie and go and I'll wait as long as you need." She looked at him. "I think you've spent a lot of energy," he said, "building something very impressive and very solid, and doing it alone, because you're extraordinarily capable, and you don't need anybody to carry what you're carrying." "I know. I can see that." A pause. "But Claudette, not needing someone isn't the same as not wanting them, and wanting something doesn't make you less capable. It makes you human." She said nothing. "That's it," he said. "That's all I had." She blinked. She blinked again. "My car is coming in 20 minutes, she said. "I know. Go to your dinner." He called toward the living room. "Rosie, come on, baby." Rosie appeared, took her medal back from Pippa, and the two girls did a rapid and very serious goodbye that involved a handshake, a hug, and a whispered negotiation Claudette couldn't hear. Leland and Rosie went to the door. He turned back once. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'd wait." And then they were gone. Claudette stood in her entryway, in her midnight blue dress, and listened to the sound of his truck pulling out of the driveway. Pippa appeared at her elbow. "Mommy," Pippa said, "your eyes are wet." "I know, baby. Is it because you're happy or sad?" Claudette looked down at her daughter. "I think," she said, "I'm not sure yet, but I think maybe happy." Pippa considered this with great gravity. "Okay," she said, "that's allowed." Claudette did not reach out that weekend, or the next. She went to work. She closed a deal. She reviewed quarterly projections. She made Pippa's breakfast and read her 3 chapters of a book about a rabbit detective, Pippa's current obsession, every night before bed. She functioned. She functioned extremely well. And somewhere underneath the functioning, she was having a very long, very honest conversation with herself. The conversation went something like this. What are you afraid of? Losing control. Caring about someone and having it go wrong. Having Pippa attached to someone and then having that person not stay. The look on Pippa's face if something fell apart. What do you actually know about this man? He shows up. He stays. He does what he says he will do. He treats his daughter the way I want the world to treat mine. He was honest with me when he didn't have to be. Is that enough? She didn't have an answer. The answer came from an unexpected direction. As it came from her mother. Georgina Farrow, 71 years old, a retired school principal, the kind of woman who had opinions about everything and delivered them wrapped in love so you could never quite be offended, came to Charlotte for a long weekend visit. On the second evening, after Pippa was asleep, they sat on the back porch with decaf coffee and the comfortable silence of people who knew each other very well. Georgina said, without preamble, "How are you, really?" Claudette told her, about Leland, about the weeks of distance, about the 7 words Pippa had whispered in the entryway, about what he'd said when he left. Georgina was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You know what your father told me when he was first trying to get my attention?" "Dad told me this story," Claudette said. "Not this part," Georgina said. "He told me, and I will never forget this. Georgie, I know you don't need me, but I would very much like to be chosen anyway." A pause. "I thought that was the most dignified thing a man had ever said," Georgina continued. "He wasn't asking me to need him. He was just asking to be chosen. There's a difference. And your father, Lord rest him, he understood that difference." Claudette looked at her coffee. "What if I choose wrong?" she said. "Then you'll have chosen," her mother said. "Claudette, you make decisions every day that affect hundreds of people and millions of dollars. When did you start treating your own heart like it was the one risk too large to take?" The next morning, Claudette called Leland. He answered on the second ring. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. A pause. "Are you free Saturday morning?" she said. Yes. "Would you and Rosie want to come for breakfast? I was going to try to make something in the new kitchen and I thought..." She stopped. Then, "I would like you to come. I'm not asking about the deck." A beat. "We'll be there at 9, he said. Saturday morning arrived. Claudette was at the stove by 8:15, which told you everything about her state of mind, because Claudette Farrow did not, as a rule, appear in her own kitchen before 9 on a weekend. She was making waffles. She had made waffles maybe 4 times in her life, and had looked up the recipe twice this week to make sure she remembered it. Pippa woke up at 8:30, appeared in the kitchen, observed the scene, her mother at the stove, batter on the counter, the good waffle iron out, and said simply, "Are people coming?" "Rosie and her dad," Claudette said. Well, Pippa's entire face transformed. "I need to brush my hair," she said very seriously, and disappeared. They arrived at 9. Rosie was carrying a small potted plant, a succulent in a terracotta pot with a tiny painted flower on the side. "Rosie picked it out," Leland said at the door. "She said if we were coming for breakfast we should bring something." Rosie held it out to Claudette. "It's hard to kill," she said, "in case you're busy." Claudette took the plant with both hands. "This is the best gift I've ever received," she said entirely sincerely. Rosie accepted this information calmly, the way people do when they expect it to be right and have been confirmed. They ate waffles, all 4 of them. At the island in the kitchen that Leland had built, the island with the stool at the right height for Pippa, who sat on it beaming like someone in their rightful seat, Rosie and Pippa ate and talked and at some point migrated to the living room, where they could be heard conducting what sounded like an elaborate game involving dramatic narration and a significant number of couch cushions. Claudette and Leland sat at the island. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You don't," he said. "I pulled away," she said. "It was unfair." "It was scared," he said. "I've been scared too. I understand scared." She looked at him. "Have you dated anyone since Priscilla?" "No," he said. "Not seriously. A few dinners that weren't right." He paused. "This is different." "This is different," she agreed. They were quiet for a moment. "I want to be honest with you," she said, "about what I can offer and what I'm not sure about yet. I'm in the middle of a lot of things. My company, Pippa, my own..." She gestured at herself in a way that was somehow both put together and completely candid. "Whatever this is." "Okay," he said. "I'm not good at letting people in," she said. "I'm aware of this." "I've noticed," he said. "I'm still here." She smiled, just slightly. "You said you'd wait." "I meant it." She looked at him, really looked, at this man who smelled like sawdust and showed up early and built things with his hands and raised his daughter with his whole heart, and somehow, against all of her very competent efforts to remain unaffected, had ended up right here at her kitchen island on a Saturday morning eating waffles. "Don't make me wait too long," she said. "Was that a..." He started. "Yes," she said. "That was. Don't overthink it." He laughed, warm and real, and, she noticed, slightly relieved. "Okay," he said. "Saturday mornings?" "Saturday mornings," she said. 3 months after that Saturday morning, Leland and Claudette had their first actual date. It was a Thursday evening. Delia watched the girls, Both of them, because Rosie had apparently been added to the schedule in what the children had clearly organized between themselves. Claudette and Leland went to dinner at a restaurant neither of them had been to, and they talked for 3 hours and closed the place down, and neither of them noticed until the waiter came to tell them, very apologetically, that the kitchen had been closed for 40 minutes. They stood outside on the sidewalk after. It was a warm October night. "That was a good date," Leland said. "It was a good date," she agreed. He looked at her. The street light. The warm air. "Can I—" he started. "Yes," she said. He laughed. "You didn't let me finish." "You were going to ask if you could kiss me," she said. "The answer is yes." "How did you—" "I'm a CEO," she said. "I read people." He kissed her then on the sidewalk in the warm October dark. Simple. Right. The kind of kiss that doesn't announce itself as the beginning of something. It just is the beginning. Quiet and sure, like a door opening into a room that's been waiting. The girls, when told, in an age-appropriate, careful way, some weeks later, that their parents were special friends who spent a lot of time together, reacted in characteristically different ways. Rosie said, "I know," and went back to her book. Pippa said, "Does that mean Rosie can sleep over more?" The logistics were negotiated. Rosie slept over more. It was not without its complications. This is the part where a different story would tell you that love fixed everything, that the blended life came together seamlessly, that the CEO and the contractor and their daughters all merged into a perfect recombinant family without seams or difficulty. That's not what happened. What happened was, it was hard sometimes. Claudette had to learn, actively learn, because she was someone who had to learn things deliberately. How to let someone else carry something, how to call Leland when something was wrong, and not preface it with, "I've almost figured this out, but..." How to be vulnerable in a sustained way, not just in the intense moments, but in the ordinary ones. Leland had to learn how to exist in a house that was not his, how to be present in Pippa's life in a way that honored Roland's role without eclipsing it, how to trust that Claudette's professional world, the 12-hour days, the trips, the intensity, was not a wall but a part of her, and that loving her meant loving all of that. They talked a lot about things that mattered, about things that felt small and weren't. They disagreed, genuinely, not performatively, about some things, and they worked through it because they were both people who'd learned, through loss and through failure, that the alternative to working through things was losing them. In some Sunday mornings, the kind where there was nowhere to be and the light came through the kitchen windows in long diagonals and both girls were still asleep. Claudette would make coffee and Leland would sit at the island and they would not even talk, just be in it, just inhabit the shared quiet of a life that was being built, one Saturday morning at a time. Pippa found them like that once. She stood in the kitchen doorway in her dinosaur pajamas, Mr. Hops II under her arm, blinking in the morning light. She looked at them. Then she walked over to the stool at the island, the one that had been built for her, climbed up and folded her arms on the counter. "I want waffles," she announced. "Good morning to you too," Claudette said. "Good morning," Pippa said, correcting herself. Then to Leland, "Will you make them?" Mommy burns the edges." "That is a baseless accusation," Claudette said. "Last time they were crunchy." "Waffles are supposed to be slightly crunchy." "Not that crunchy." Leland was already off the stool and reaching for the waffle iron. Claudette watched him. This man in her kitchen, in the kitchen he'd built on a Sunday morning, making waffles because her daughter had asked him to with the total ease of someone who knew the request would be honored. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the small succulent on the windowsill, still alive, still growing, which felt symbolic in the way that only things that aren't trying to be symbolic can. She thought about 7 words. "Please don't go. You smell like my real dad." Pippa hadn't meant them to be profound. She hadn't meant them to be the thing that cracked open a door that Claudette had been standing in front of for weeks, not quite able to push. She'd just said what she felt. Because she was 5. Because children say what's true before the world teaches them to be careful with truth. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, the smallest voice in the room is carrying the largest message. Stay, it said. Let someone stay. The real ones smell like sawdust in Sunday mornings, and every good thing you stopped believing was still possible. Let them stay. There are people who come into your life like renovations. They come in, and it's a little disruptive at first, a little loud. There's demo before there's building, and the building takes longer than you thought it would. And there are days when it looks like a mess, and you wonder if you should have just left it alone. And then one day, it's done, and you stand in the middle of it, and it's better than what you had before, better than what you'd even imagined when you started. And you think, how did I live in the old version? How did I not know it could feel like this? Leland Okafor was not looking for love when he walked into Claude Farrow's house with a tape measure and a sketch. Claude Farrow was not looking for anything except a better kitchen layout. And Rosie and Pippa were just being exactly who they were. Children who told the truth, who loved without condition, who reached for what felt good and right without the complicated overhead that adults bring to every decision. It was Pippa who said it out loud. Please don't go. 3 words. And then 4 more that broke everything open. You smell like my real dad. She wasn't wrong. He did. He smelled like a man who stayed, who showed up, who built things with his hands and with his whole heart, who understood that presence is the most powerful thing one person can offer another. He smelled like her grandfather. He smelled like home. And maybe that's all any of us are really looking for. Someone who feels like coming home to a place you didn't know was yours until you arrived. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something or someone or a version of yourself that's still figuring it out, share it with somebody who needs to hear it tonight. And if you're watching this thinking, I'm waiting for someone like that, keep your heart open, because the best ones, they don't announce themselves. They just show up at the door and ask smart questions and listen, actually listen, when you tell them what you need. And they write it in the margin in their own handwriting for you to find. This has been Crest Stories. If you made it this far, thank you, genuinely. You're exactly who this channel's for. Like this video if it got to you. Subscribe if you want more, and drop a comment below telling me, what's the smallest thing someone's ever said to you that changed everything? I'll be reading every single one. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and don't forget, the realest love always has room for one more stool at the island. See you next time.